As the world and BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa countries continue to be gripped by the global COVID-19 pandemic, the new development bank marked its 5th anniversary, and the bank, formerly referred to as the BRICS Development Bank, aims to mobilize resources for development projects in BRICS, emerging economies, as well as some developing countries. To discuss this now, we joined via Zoom by Leslie Maasdorp. He is the Vice President and the Chief Financial Officer of the new development bank. Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us here on the SABC News channel.
Thanks, Melissa.
Now, as I said on my introduction, that BRICS countries, that except for China, of course, are on the top 5 of the worst affected by the COVID-19. What has the role of the bank been in assisting in this regard?
Melissa, as you know, the pandemic started here in China. So right early on, in the early part of January, early February, we went to the drawing board to design what we call an emergency assistance program. So we put in place $10 billion devoted for the 5 countries, $42 billion each. So these are specific loans targeted at helping these countries beef up their health, public health care infrastructure, make sure that there's enough hospital beds for patients, make sure that hospital workers have enough protective gear, make sure hospitals have ventilators, all the associated necessary medical equipment. So we designed these loans to be such that we deal with the health pandemic at the one side, but also that we help our government to begin to look at economic recovery. All of the economies have experienced significant economic slowdown, including China, by the way. So the first part of these loans have already been disbursed. We advanced $1 billion to China, $1 billion to India, $1 billion to South Africa, and $1 billion to Brazil. The second half of this year, we're hoping to now help the government with focused, targeted interventions to stimulate the economy, because so many jobs have been lost over the last 5-6 months, and more jobs will be lost. So you might know that in South Africa, the prediction is that up to 1 million jobs could be destroyed. So we are hoping that we can augment and complement the existing government efforts to fight the economic decline.
And I think really the main concern here is that this particular crisis has the potential to sort of reverse all the hard-fought economic progress that have been made over the past 2 decades.
You are spot on, Palesa. Basically, over the last 20-25 years, as you know, China has grown phenomenally, and so has India. India is, in fact, one of the fastest growing global large emerging markets in the world. South Africa has also made considerable progress. We grew, as you might know, in the early part of 2000, 5-6% in the build-up towards the 2008 financial crisis. Brazil also experienced rapid economic expansion over that time. So what this crisis has, as you just said, it has a real danger that if this economic decline is not reversed, that we could undo all of that economic progress. So it is very important to, in a very meticulous way, look at what can be done. And one of the things that can be done is to beef up and strengthen investment in infrastructure. And that's what we do as a bank. In other words, South Africa needs to, for example, invest more in the building of new roads, new port infrastructure, new power infrastructure. Governments need to invest more in social infrastructure, building of more roads and schools and hospitals and clinics and so on. Because by investing in infrastructure, we can lay the basis for that economic growth when the pandemic is over.
And I think, Mr. Maasdorp, importantly, what this COVID-19 pandemic has done is to once again show how critical multilateral development banks are in moments of crisis. So how can such banks lead through a crisis, and perhaps also talk to us about their uniqueness in terms of their structure in tackling challenges such as this one?
As you just pointed out, Palesa, multilateral banks are global in character, meaning we work across various countries. So we have the benefit also during a crisis that we are not like traditional banks who typically lend during sort of boom times, they tend to lend a lot more. And during times when the economy contracts, they tend to sort of limit their extension of credit. We are exactly the opposite. We are counter-cyclical. We are not focused on lending in the short term. We are really looking at development impact, and we're looking at the long term. So we have this unique situation where when we plan, for example, our investments in projects, we take a very long-term horizon. And then secondly, as I mentioned, we can collaborate across countries, because a pandemic, as you know, cannot be solved in one country alone. It can be, let's say, solved in China tomorrow, but if it continues in the rest of Asia, then China cannot grow. So it is very important to have a multilateral and a global approach in dealing with global problems. Global problems cannot be resolved in one country alone.
So now the bank turns 5. Let's just reflect at some of its achievements and perhaps some setbacks.
I would say there are 3 or maybe 4 key achievements over these last 5 years. 5 years ago, as you just mentioned, the bank did not exist. Today, we have a loan book of $18.3 billion. So we have built real concrete infrastructure, hard economic infrastructure. There are now a lot of power stations in different parts of the BRICS countries that were built by the bank. We are building a new airport in Beijing. We are building a rail metro in Mumbai. We are upgrading the port in Durban with Transnet. We are doing a whole range of projects to beef up and support ESCOM. And so the list goes on. So our first major achievement has been just supporting the government with economic infrastructure. The second major achievement, I would say, is that we are beginning to build and strengthen our local currency, the efforts of our government to support these infrastructure projects in local currency. For example, we are funding a lot of our projects in China, in renminbi, which is the local currency in China. We will also finance projects in South Africa, in South African rand, in Brazil, in Brazilian real, and so on. The third major achievement has been that the bank has obtained a very high credit rating. We have a AA+ credit rating, which means that we are one of the highest rated financial institutions in the world, but specifically the highest rated in emerging markets. And then fourthly, the foundations have now been laid for the bank to become a truly global institution, not just BRICS countries. Over the next year, 2 or 3, we're going to be expanding, and a lot more countries will join us throughout the world. So it's a really important milestone, the celebration of our 5th anniversary.
All right. So we know that the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres also talks about a new deal. Is it possible to the world to agree on this particular new deal?
In his Nelson Mandela address, I read it today, he was spot on. There's a need for a new, what he calls a new social contract. What COVID-19 has done, it has really exposed a lot of the contradictions of the status quo. And what is required now is a new social contract, really. It's kind of a new deal. And there's no way we can move forward on the basis of what the economy was before COVID-19. What he has made a call for, and there's widespread support for this, is that we have to go back to the drawing board. For example, economic growth cannot just be growth at all costs. We have to begin to grow the economy in such a manner that we deal with inequality. Our growth has to be more inclusive. Our growth also has to be more sustainable and more green, so that we can, clean up our polluted cities, clean up quality of air, clean up water and river systems, and so on. So the nature of economic growth, having more quality growth and less inequality, is part of that new social contract that he has made a reference to.
All right, I'm afraid due to time constraints, that's where we'll leave it. But thank you so much for coming through. All right, well, there you have it. Leslie Maasdorp is the Vice President and the Chief Financial Officer of the New Development Bank, talking to us about the strides that have been made since the establishment of this bank, but most importantly as well how the bank has helped the different nations amid this COVID-19 pandemic.